I've just pulled this apart. It's got lots of pieces. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. I just need to clean up some of the broken material in here, because this is what I'm going to use as patterns. That's the main material on the front. This is the beading in the centre around the pocket area. That is the pocket, the rear of the pocket. Rear? No, the front of the pocket that's visible in the car. It's got beading across the top. It's got padding inside it. So that's a piece. This is the piece at the back, in behind all of that. That's all mostly covered up. This is the only bit you can see. The pocket is in there, and then there's all beading pieces up in there. So there's many pieces. It's all nailed in position with thumbtacks. I'm not sure whether I'll do that. I may use staples, or I may use thumbtacks. I'll have to think about that. But at this stage I'll clean these up so I can use them as patterns. At the moment they're just too dirty. I'll get dirt over everything. So anyway, it's the start. Everything's pulled apart. I'll start with the timber, reproduce the template I've got for that, so I can mark all these holes. Here's these holes for those special brackets. The door handle up the top there. So I've got all those to do and make sure that's right. Anyway, I just need to clean everything up at the moment. This is the door card off the Consort. The timber is actually just rotted away, so that's why I've got to replace the timbers. The shape of the timber is roughly this. Now, I've just been working on a possible template. This won't be the timber I'll use. I'm using a much thicker timber. It's about 6mm thick. But this is good enough to use as a pattern. I'll use this for both doors, because what I've got to do is to actually fit it up so I can attach the brackets that go onto this that are used to screw it to the door. So let's put that aside. The brackets I'm talking about are these three at the top. They screw to the metal on the door, and you can't see those because they're under the wood trim on top of the door. So I've got to take these off and fit them to the wooden template first. There are also two other brackets, one here and one here, which you use to actually hook the door on and hold it in place. So there's a couple of round-headed screws that will go in the door, and they'll fit in these slots and enable the door to be held into position. Not sure what holds it on the bottom end. I've got a feeling it's probably screws. I can't tell on the pattern I took off the door that's on the car, but on the door that one of my spare doors, which is this piece over here, there appear to be some screws that we use to also screw it on. So looks like there's one there, and perhaps one on the bottom, one about there. There's one there, there, and there. I'll just turn this over and show the design of the door. This is a pocket, of course, in the door. That actually goes, I can just put the timber over the top. There's no timber in the centre there, so over that whole door pocket section, that's just all vinyl, no timber behind it. the timber is actually behind these parts of the door. The things I've got to make up, of course, are these piping pieces around the door. They go all around the locking mechanism, around here. They also go around over here on this. They go around there. That's where the carpet section is put in. So I've got to allow for that. And of course there's piping all around the pocket area. The vinyl is actually in two pieces. The wood is covered in vinyl, and then this pocket area, you can see it's falling off on the inside, it's actually a separate piece, and it sits over the hole. It's a separate piece of vinyl. So I've got to make it in pieces. The other thing I've noticed on this too is that the vinyl in the pocket area has wadding in between it. So I've got to fit wadding. Certainly on this part of the pocket, there's wadding on in between these two pieces of vinyl in here. And there's also wadding under this. So it's quite a complex piece to work on. But the first thing I'll be doing is to make sure I've got a template that I can use on both sides of the car. On this template I'll mark where the mounting brackets are fitted. As I say, there's brackets across the top and one about there and one there. I've got to mark those as well. So that's the first thing I'll do. I'll just use this as a guide, and then I'll cut the 6mm timber I've got in the other workshop. I'll cut that out, and then once I'm certain I've got the holes right for the mounting points, and also I need one for the door handle in around here somewhere. There I think it is. So I've got to make sure I get those positions right before I address any of the vinyl. This is the template I made up from the old door card that I had. Now bear in mind that these doors are not all the same exact dimensions. There's differences in each of them. This door card wasn't the one that came off this door, and even with that I actually pulled this door apart to repair the bottom section of the door and so on, so dimensions aren't exact. So what I've done, I use this as a basis for making up a template for the door. Now these pieces of paper here, they're there to make up the shortfalls in the card that I've used as a template. So I've actually had to add pieces of paper to get as close as I can anyway, the right dimensions for the door. Now it's probably going to be a bit of oversize, but that really doesn't matter. What I've got to allow for is that you've got this polished timber up the top there, and the card actually, not only does it have vinyl on it, but it has piping around the edges. Now, piping's about this size, it's not that big, but I have to allow enough gap between the timbers on the top there for this piping to go in once this door card is attached to the door. In addition to that, I've got to allow enough gap around the edges, because the piping goes around the edges as well. So what I've done at this stage is just added paper where the as I said, where the shortfall was, and there were significant gaps around this edge of the door and the rear edge of the door. So what I'll do now is to actually use this as a basic template to cut the door card timber out that I'm going to use. Now, timber that I'm using is probably twice as thick as this, so it doesn't have the problem of it all cracking like this one did when I tried to cut it. So I'll do that next and show you then what I'm going to do. Alright, here's the timber I've cut out. This will be the card for the door. As you can see, it's a thicker timber, but even with those adjustments that I've made, I've still got more to, instead of adding timber, as I had to do with the original template, I've actually got to trim the edges off ever so slightly. I made this a little bit oversized. So what I'll be doing is, first of all, working on the top shape. It's not quite there. It's a little bit irregular. So I'll get that shape right up against the timber here. Allow sufficient gap for the piping to go in. Once I've got that settled, then what I'll be doing is actually screwing this timber to the door. Now, the door itself is not vertically straight, it's actually, it curves inwards. So basically I'm putting a straight bit of timber on a curved surface, and what I need to do is to put some screws through the timber into the door around this level, and that will, just put that on, that will force the timber into the shape of the door. You can see there how much it's got to go in. So that once I've got that right, I'll be putting that timber, those screws in to get that shape. Now when I do that, the top end is forced out, but the other thing that I have is that this timber also has brackets at the top. Now they sit under this polished timber at the top. Take that off. So this actually goes up there, so round about there. There are metal brackets on the top of this. I think there are 3. They screw to the metal up here. You can see some screw holes there. There's one there, one up there. So they will hold the timber in at the top, while that actually is also screwed in there to curve it around. So this timber's actually got to fit the curve of the door, and it does that by being attached at the top and also attached in the centre there. The other thing I've got, of course, is these little dome head screws here. Now what they're for is that there is actually a hole in the door card round about there, and this is positioned on the inside of the card over that hole. So what happens is the door card is pushed over that dome nut, or dome screw, and then it pushes up, and that's what locks the door card in place at this level of the door. once that's locked in place, then those screws are put in, then these screws are put in, and the door card is held. So there's still a lot more to do, but initially I'll be just making sure this curve is right, and then I'll position it and then screw it. So I'm still a long way off being able to put the vinyl on, but I'm getting closer. I've trimmed the card down some more to get a better shape. Still a little bit of adjustment to do, not much, but what I'm trying to do is get the position for the screws that will screw the door on down here. Now, it's once again it's trial and error, because where I'm drilling through I actually can't see what I'm encountering with the drill on the aluminium frame of this door. If I go too far to the edge, I end up going into the thickest part of the structure, which then makes the screws very difficult to put in. In fact, I've already snapped some stainless screws trying to get them into the aluminium. So I've now got the stage where this one is correct, and the other holes I drilled, or had drilled, certainly down on the bottom here, I've actually run a drill through the card and marked where it's going to drill on the door, and I've had to adjust those somewhat on the bottom here, so I've had to raise that. On this one I've actually had to bring it across, and the same one in around here I've had to bring it across, just to make it easier to get the screws through the aluminium. So once I've got all those re-drilled, drilled into the aluminium structure, then I'll screw them in place to make sure they will go through. When that's done, as I say, just a couple of minor bits to shave off the card, then I can go about actually putting the vinyl on the card. Now, I had purchased some piping to go around the card, but as it turns out I've actually have to order a slightly larger diameter piping, and the reason for that is that the card I'm using is slightly thicker than the original, and I purchased piping the exact size of the original, so I'm going to just go up 1 millimetre in the size of the piping, or I think it might be 1.5 millimetres, to allow for the greater thickness of the card I'm using. When I made the initial adjustments to this card, I thought I'd see if I could use this card as a template for the other door, but as I mentioned before, the doors are basically individual, and when I try to put it on the other side, it is not a match for the other door. So I'm going to have to do what I did for this door, use my rough template, and then adjust it with paper stick-ons to get the right size for the door. Anyway, it's taking a long time, and you know, I'm basically starting from scratch with this card and finding out how to attach it and where I can screw it into the frame. So it's getting closer. Not much more work to do on this, so I'll just do that, and then I'll start putting some vinyl on. The door card board itself is now complete. Got the clips on for holding it onto the door, drilled the holes, and I know everything lines up, they will screw in, so I've just marked those on the rear of the door so I can find them when I fold the vinyl over. So what I'm doing now is putting the main piece of vinyl on. Of course it doesn't cover the hole, it's a separate piece. It actually has to be sewn up and so on. So I've started to cut it out. That's the right size. I've looked at how I'm going to pull this over the timber. So I've got to cut it on an angle round the curves. But the other thing I've got to do as well is the door card also has wadding underneath the vinyl. So this wadding I've actually got to stick to the other side of the door card, and then the vinyl will go over the top of that. So that has to be done first. Also the wadding actually lines the door pocket as well, so it's not just the vinyl, it makes up the pocket. It's basically an envelope containing the wadding itself. So by the time you've finished gluing things on or tacking things on, there are a lot of certainly on the original card there were hundreds of tacks around holding on, this layer, and then the piping layer, and then the pocket for the door. So there were many layers of vinyl to be tacked down. Now initially I'm going to glue it, and I'll hold it in place with tacks, but this bottom, I'll call it the bottom piece of vinyl, in terms of what goes on the back, I'm not going to tack that at this stage because there's other layers to go over the top of it, so I'll use the tacks for the other layers, and they'll go through and into that as well. I'm hoping that the glue will also hold these. I'll probably put a few tacks in here as well, but also there's piping to go along the edge. So initially this will just be glue, and once again when that piping is done I'll put some tacks through that, the piping and this layer. So the door card's a long way from being finished. I did order some more piping. I went up another 1.5 mil. That arrived, but I've decided I'm actually going up to a piping about 6 mil thick. And the reason for that is because of the thickness of the card I'm using. This is around 7 mil. So I'm going to use a much larger piping around the edges. So that's on order, hasn't arrived yet, but hopefully it won't be too long. But at this stage I'll just turn this over and I'll cut out the wadding I'm going to use on there, and then I'll glue it to this side. Now I've used contact glue, but I didn't wait for it to tack off. I just put it on the board and then just push this straight into it. It's too awkward to try and use it like a conventional contact. I'll certainly use the conventional method to put the vinyl on, but not this. The only problem with it is I've basically put a lot of glue on there to stick this down, and I'm just going to have to get out of the room. It stinks. I'll just let this go off, and then I'll start to glue the vinyl on, but I can't stay in here much longer. I'll end up with a headache. So anyway, that's gone on nicely. Just provides a little bit of padding under the vinyl, but it's something that the original cards had, so I'll replicate that. Anyway, that's it. I'm getting out of here. I've just finished gluing and temporary tacking the vinyl. I intend to pull these tacks out once the glue is dry. I've just got to cut around the locating lugs here. I've just covered over the top, same as that one. So got to cut those out. Got to cut a small hole in here for the what's this one, door handle there. The thing has gone on alright. The wadding just gives it a soft, obviously a padded touch. It's actually not too bad. The there's a lot more to do, of course. The pocket has got to go in here. I can't do that until I've got the piping cord, the new piping cord. So I'm just still waiting on that. The bottom, of course, is an aluminium piece that tacks underneath this opening here, and that's covered with carpet. Now I do have the carpet, but once again I need the piping around the edge. So I'm just held up at the moment until I get the piping. Hopefully that won't be too much longer. But it's very slow to put on. You can't really do too much at a time with the glue and so on, and stretching it. So basically I started at the top and worked down and just finished down the bottom here. Seems to have tensioned all right, so I'm reasonably happy with that. But as I say, it's a long way from finished. I finally got the supply of piping to do on the inside here. I'm using that size, so it's works better in relation to the thicker card. But just looking at the additional vinyl I bought, this vinyl here is Jaguar Red. I couldn't source that, so I tried to buy something by colour on the net, and this is what I ended up with. It looked a lot darker. I wouldn't have minded if it had been closer to this, the Jaguar Red, but it's actually a very bright red. Now, I've been looking closely at it whether I'd use it, but I might. It just seems too bright. What I'm going to do is to see if I can source some Jaguar Red, more than likely from the UK. I have seen something similar coming from China, but I'm not going to try that. Jaguar Red is available in the UK. The only problem with that is I'm not sure about the time it'll take to deliver. I think the weight would be worth it. The way this is going, it's just going to look out of place. Now, I just didn't have enough. I should have bought a lot more of this when I bought it, but I bought it quite some time ago, before I even started to look at how these cards were made. And there is a lot of vinyl that goes into it, and there's a lot of waste. And of course this hole in the middle is waste, because you actually end up with a waste piece like this in the centre, and you can't use that on the door card because it's too too small, you can't use it on the pocket. So there's a fair bit of waste, and by the time I get through all the door cards, I'm going to run out of this Jaguar Red. That's why I went out and bought quite a few metres of additional, but unfortunately too light. The other thing I didn't allow for is the amount of piping that goes onto these doors. Now, just the piping around the edge and around here, I think I ended up, between all the doors, it's about 10, almost 11 metres of piping. So once again, that's also vinyl I've got to use for that, and there's likely to be waste in that in terms of the length I've got to cut out of the rolls. Some of it I'll have to cut lengthways and some sideways. So anyway, that's the way it goes. The hopefully supply delivery times won't be too long, but certainly not as quick as it is if I'm sourcing it locally.